Unboxing Careers.
Welcome everyone to the Unboxing Careers podcast, the show dedicated to discovering what careers are actually like. I'm your host, Greg Zakwitz, and in today's episode, we're doing something just a tad different. We're talking internships. Almost every guest we've had on has mentioned the importance of early internships, so I figured, why not discuss how to actually land one and then pivot it into a full-time job. To do that, I'd like to welcome Julia Levy, HR pro and author of From High to Hired, Your Inside Guide to Internships. Julia, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having. Excited to talk about something I'm really passionate about, helping the next gen of students launch their careers.
After about the first 5 guests mentioned internships and the number they did and how helpful they were, I was thinking to myself, how do I pivot this into an episode, but get someone knowledgeable enough to talk about this? And then we connected. You're like, hey, I'm writing a book about that. And I'm like, well, this is perfect. So, Julia, why don't you give us a quick background on yourself and then why you wrote the book?
Yeah. I'll go a little deeper dive than my 30-second elevator pitch, just so people could hear a little bit about my career, since we are talking about unboxing careers. I was one of those lucky people that always had an idea of what I might want to do. Took a career counseling, like group class, not career counseling, a counseling like group class in high school, and really thought it was amazing. Really getting inside of, what makes people tick, or, just learning about people's emotional states and such. Went to college, and I was not the best student in high school. I was that the honor student that got B's and C's, and the teachers would be, Julia would be a straight A student if she only applied herself. And so I went to Drexel University for their co-op program, figuring that break, having a co-op for 6 months and then being in class for 6 months would be really good. Plus, it would build my resume that I'd get out of college, although it was a 5-year program, with 1.5 years of good experience. And I was a psychology major. So what I quickly learned, Drexel was really an engineering and business school at the time. And what I learned is the co-op program had a lot of jobs available for engineers and business students and nothing for a psychology major. So through the co-op classes, they had taught us how to search for a job, how to create a resume. And so I had to hustle to identify my own job opportunity. And I got a job at a hospital, a mental hospital, running their testing department. And what I found is once I learned how to give the new patients their battery of tests and score them, then I was kind of bored. And so I was reading a lot of books and thought, I really need to go to graduate school. And so I rushed through Drexel, didn't do any other co-ops, but then went to grad school at Georgia State and got a master's in education with a specialization in career counseling. So it was a counseling degree. And when I got out of school and I looked at licensure, and looked at jobs, they were not paying very well. And I was working full time while I was in grad school. And so I ended up, one of my friends was doing recruiting and said, hey, why don't you try this? And got me a job where she was. And that's how I got my foot in the door into recruiting and really loved it. So I started out doing technical recruiting for a company that did consultants and technology consulting for companies, implementations and things like that. And then moved on from there for a recruiting job at a company that had, I know we're going to hate this, telemarketing services. So it was like call centers and inbound and outbound. So those annoying phone calls that you get. And my boss there then moved on to another company and created a job for me that was part recruiter and part project manager. So I got this opportunity to learn kind of HR and talent acquisition operations. That then turned into talent acquisition operations jobs. And then that turned into leading talent acquisition teams at a lot of big companies, anywhere from 8,000 employees to 125,000 employees. So the last several years, I've been leading global talent acquisition teams. Probably for the last 12 to 15 years, I have been managing in some capacity. Usually it's one of my direct reports that's leading campus recruiting teams. And so one of the things that I've really been passionate about is kind of helping build programs at these companies where it's not just summer help, but we're actually building a path to bringing people on into our entry level roles. And so, really developing that talent pipeline of students so that we can build the right kind of organization. So that was it in a
And
nutshell. A little bit about kind of how I got my start and my involvement in campus recruiting, how I got to the book and just this passion work. I left my corporate job several months ago and needed to decompress from that. And in doing so, really had been thinking about the internship experience and some of the gaps that I see in there's a lot of really talented students out there, but they're not either the schools aren't preparing them well enough to when they get into the company to be successful, or like as a company, we've really had to put some effort into in that first week giving some of the skills to students, to our interns, in order for them to be successful within their 10-week internship program.
gotcha. And I want to talk about the skills. And prepping for this interview, I wasn't sure what order I wanted to go on. So I'm going to ask you to kind of guide me a little bit. So my initial thought was, what's a good place for people to actually find an internship? And a lot of times the school will do this, but a lot of times the good ones or the ones that you might not think about connected to the school. They're from someone you know or a central database. So my thought was, where's a good place to look for the internship first? And then we pivot into what should we be looking for? What are our skills we're developing? How do we set ourselves up to apply for that interview or for that internship and the subsequent interview? Does that sound to you like a logical place to start?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Finding internships. I think there's a couple different routes. So the schools do have partnerships with companies, and there are boards like Handshake that kind of aggregate jobs. You can use Google. I think a lot of students are drawn to the brand names that they already know. So when these schools are having career fairs with the companies that they have established relationships with, then students really are drawn to the name brands that they know. And I think students miss out a lot of times on some really cool and interesting companies that they didn't go explore because they were focused on, I want to work for Apple or I want to work for Google or Amazon, etc. So I think that there's students that are missing out on some great opportunities at these, business to business companies and or maybe some smaller or mid-sized companies that you just haven't heard of. And I've worked for some of those brands that people are like, who is that? What do they do? And they've been like really amazing companies. And so that's one thing. I think using AI, so use Google, use Gemini, use ChatGPT. They can help you find companies that have positions posted. My big concern is there are a lot of fake and scammers out there. So you need to make sure you're going to that company website. If you're seeing job postings, like just make sure it's really a legitimate company. So follow it back to the company's actual website in their career section. They'll have their jobs located there. But I think that that's a really good place to go is directly to the company, because not every company can afford posting all their jobs on LinkedIn or Indeed. Those companies do charge employers or Handshake, and the schools aren't connected with every employer out there.
Makes sense. With this might be too in the weeds, but let's use one of those big names, right? Everyone wants to go work for Google, Facebook, Apple, whatever it might be. How, in your experience, how likely are they to take someone from, I don't know, Nebraska who wants to do their internship at Facebook in California, how often are they likely to take those people versus a local resident who is already established? They don't have to, move, find logic, all this, the basic things that kind of matter would interrupt someone's life.
Yeah. I know that at the companies that I've worked for, we have provided stipends and things like that for students so that they can uh, live in our city for the summer or provide. We've had partnerships with a university nearby to help provide affordable housing so that those students could afford to be in our location for the internship. So a lot of companies will do things like that. Other ones have expanded footprint so that if you're in Nebraska and they have a location in Nebraska, then you don't necessarily have to be at the mothership for the internship opportunity. I will say some of the schools, some of the companies like every company will have core schools that they go to recruit
Yep.
from. And so you want to understand who those core schools are and then do some research to see how likely they are to bring on interns who are at schools not in that core list. So that's something to think about. I always like to hire at the scrappy state schools instead of the Ivy Leagues, for example, because I think that some of the brands I've worked at, it would be harder for us to compete with the top talent at the Ivies with the large companies like an Apple or Amazon, etc. And so I want to make sure that we're realistic getting the best talent that we can and that we're not, trying to blow our budgets competing against the big tech.
Makes tons of sense. Yeah, and I figured Facebook, they probably have an in with Stanford, right? It's probably a big recruiting place for them as well. So I think the one thing here, which is a part of your book, right, from high to hired, and we'll talk about some of those skills and developing relationships when you're doing your internship. But part of a company's goal of internship is not necessarily just goodwill. It's like, hey, we want free labor, or quote unquote cheap labor, whatever it is. They don't want to just do something because they're doing it. They're also using that as a recruitment tool, right? You get to vet someone, you get to figure out if the personality matches, if their skill set matches, because it's a lot cheaper to hire someone you have familiarity with. That's a word I can never say, by the way. It's my kryptonite. So there's a reason for this, and that's good for the person going in if they get the job or the internship, because they know there's a vested interest in there. So that is one of the things where, like you mentioned, they have these schools that they partner with. Like, there's a reason they do that. They want engineers from Stanford. They want, so it's always good there. So let's do that. Let's not even go into, it doesn't have to be a big name, but I'm Greg in Durham, North Carolina, right? Plenty of companies here, biotech and stuff like that. But let's just do a local employer, decent sized company looking for an internship. I'm in XYZ field. As someone looking for that internship, what are some of the things I should be looking for in either the job description or when I talk to them? Like, what are some of those things that I should know? Hey, this is probably a better fit for me, and this is probably not a good fit for me because of these things. Are there some things you can lead us to?
Yeah, I write about some of this in the book is understanding your values. So do you want to work for a really large company, small company? Do you want a consumer brand, B2B type company? Is kind of exploring the different types of internships that are out there. There's companies that do micro internships that are just partnerships. There's summer internships. There's summer jobs. So you probably, if we think about the most common, which is like the summer internship, you want to
Mm-hmm.
understand if they're looking for, is this really an internship where they are investing in you as much as you're investing in them, or is this a summer job? So looking at the job description to look at the type of work that you're going to be doing, the kind of impact you might have for the organization. You could look on people's LinkedIn profiles and see, do they hire their interns? And I think that's one really great question to make sure you ask in the interview process is what's their conversion rate? And so I've been at companies where I've gotten there and asked that question, like, okay, let's look at historically, what's our conversion rate? What's the target? When I've gotten there, they weren't measuring that, or the measurement was low. Like, we're going to only convert, like, we've only been converting 30% of our eligible seniors into roles. And to me, that's really a dismal number. And I like to see it anywhere from like 60% on up. So
Okay.
that's something you want to look for, right? If they're not converting people into full-time offers, then you're just going to get some experience and then move on to the next thing. And so that's just something to think about. Do they have a lot of returners? So did people intern in their rising junior summer and then come back for their rising senior summer? What are their internship programs? How are they built? Do they have rotational programs? So if you're a finance person, are you learning about different aspects of finance? Do they have projects that you're working on, like keystone or capstone projects? Do you have exposure to leadership at the company? And so those are some things that you want to explore, like what's important to you, what do you want to get out of it, and make sure that those are things that the company is offering for their internship programs.
What would you say? This is impossible. This is an impossible question to ask you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I'm going to stick you in a
Go
corner
ahead.
here. Some of those things you mentioned, right? Do I have access to senior leadership? Are we working on projects? What if the answers are like 50% yes and 50% no? Is it really up to the person then to decide, hey, these are like, should they rank, these are the most important things to me, the least important, and then figure out the check boxes and where they do it? Is that the best way to really do it?
That is a good question. You know, it depends, but I would say you have to understand your goals, right? If your goal at the end of the internship, especially if this is your rising senior summer, if you, like the 8 to 10, 11 week internship is an 8 to 10 week interview in many cases. So if you are going to be a senior and this is the summer before your senior year, and this internship is one that you want where you could potentially get a job offer off of it, then asking that question around conversions and their intent to hire the top performers is really critical and should be your number one, one of your top decision criteria. Really just depends. If you're looking just to pick up a little experience and you're going to go to grad school after, then that wouldn't be as much of an influence on you. And maybe you're still trying to figure out what you want to do, so that might not be as important. But I think that if you are looking at your internship as experience building and the companies that you're focused on are ones that you might want to work for after you're done with school, then that criteria should be at the top or pretty close to the top of your list.
No, it's a really good answer and a good way to think about it. You mentioned something in that answer, and you mentioned something a couple minutes ago that kind of parallel together, and it was brought up by other guests as well, which is something I was naive to when I was younger, was multiple internships when you're going through. So when I was going to school, and I don't have a big collegiate background in my family, but the perception was you go to school, you do your internship, and that qualifies you to graduate, and then you're off into the working world. So you do one. And I think one of our first couple of guests on this entire podcast series was like, no, you should be doing at least two, right? So I think you mentioned rising junior, rising senior, going through, and like my mind was blown. I'm like, oh, you can do that? Like they hire? I didn't think they would even hire for that. So this is a really long way to ask you, Julia. Like, what two-pronged question? What is a good approach to how many internships you should do, and what kind of rising between what grades those are? But also, like, if you don't know what you want to do, or maybe you do, is it beneficial to do it at different companies to see how different companies work? Even like, okay, I want to work for Facebook, so I'm going to do the Facebook one. Should I do two at Facebook, or should I get a different perspective? Because like I might like this other company much better than I do Facebook. I just never knew. Like, what's the right maybe the right balance or kind of criteria you should look at to figure out how you should do these and when you should be doing them?
So, larger companies, at least that I've worked at, our internship programs typically were for rising juniors and rising seniors and
Okay.
not rising sophomores. Some of that is a maturity thing um, where students just don't take the internship as serious. And I know this is like such a big stereotype and generalization, right? But that's companies have had some poor experiences with younger students and have made decisions on, and there's limited internships. And if you are serious about converting people, then people have gotten their core classes out of the way and are kind of deep into classes related to their major. And you're typically hiring computer sciences people for IT roles and finance people for accounting and finance roles. So it kind of makes sense that the timing of it, but some smaller companies might not be as rigid in that. There's also organizations out there. I had just found out about this company, Parker Dewey, in the last year or so. They do little micro internships, and so it's like project work that students can work, the kind of gig economy, right? That companies will say, "Oh, we've got this little project that we could use an intern on," and it's could be any time during the year. So there are resources and ways that you could get mini internships or micro experiences that can help you build your resume that aren't necessarily a formal internship. Even working at, regular employer, because listen, economy's tough right now. Schools have gotten so much more expensive than when I was in college that, my stepdaughter and niece and others that I know, have worked at Trader Joe's and different places like that through college. And so some of those students can't afford not to work a full-time job in lieu of internships. And so, but you can still take that experience and frame it in a way that when you're looking for a full-time job, that you can show the impact that you've made to that organization. So I think there's things that you can do both ways. So I know I went a little aside on the question, but
No, that's good because I'm going to dig into some of that stuff that you just talked about. Generally, would you recommend people do multiple internships though, like 2 internships, like 2
no,
consecutive years, or whatever those
I
are?
think at least one. It's are you making an impact during your internship, right? Or you're building your professional brand, so not just the work you're doing, but the connections that you're making while you're there. Um, it doesn't hurt to see what 2 different company experiences are. If you're lucky to get a job at a big employer, some of those companies, you might not have as much exposure to a senior leader, or you might be one of 500 interns, and the type of work that you're doing and the impact that you're making might be very different than a small startup, right? If you're doing an internship at a startup or a growth company that's got upwards 10 to 1,000 people, the kind of work and impact that you're going to make is very different than that 50,000 employer
Yeah,
company. And so some of it just goes back to that understanding what you might want to get out of an internship experience, and then making sure that you're working for the types of companies that can help gain that experience.
perfect. And then I'm going to circle back to what you mentioned just a minute ago. You kind of started getting into skills a little bit. So here's it's like the old adage with work. Like we want to hire someone who can do all these things, but they have to have experience. But we want them to be junior, right? Can't be junior without the experience, you know. So it's kind of like the dog chasing the tail. So uh, you're in college, you probably don't have tons of skills, you probably don't have tons of experience to list on a resume. So how do people approach this? Should they have a formal resume? Is it more like a different version of it? And then what should they be putting on there?
Coming out of college, I think there's lots of opportunities that you have to build and put things on your resume that doesn't necessarily relate to a formal job. So when I was in college, I was active in my sorority and was president of my sorority at one point. And there were a lot of programs and projects that we did through Greek life that I was able to put on my first resume. But I also worked at the counseling center for a student organization and had leadership there where I was doing training and speaking about date rape of all things, and just kind of building awareness there. And that helped me talk about, public speaking and the different groups that I went to, and programs I designed. In graduate school, I worked for a program that was a good resume builder. So there were things that I did that could help build projects that help me have, accomplishment statements on my resume and show impact that I made. And that wasn't an internship or a paying job. So I think every student can have those opportunities, that might not look like a job or work, but can be great assets on your resume that a hiring manager is going to look at and say, oh, I get it. Like, yes, they don't have 6 months of this, but look at these three things that are interrelated to it.
Yeah. And I'm going to put you into the hiring cap now because that's what you used to do with these things. So you're looking at a couple different candidates here. You have one candidate who has a couple things they've done that's a little more specific to either the company or the type of work that you're going to have the intern do. And you have the other candidate who doesn't quite have the focus with their either volunteer experience or campus experience, whatever, but they have a lot more of it. So they're more involved in different organizations, different clubs. When you were looking at those two candidates, so more niche targeted, but less, I say less involved, but like less opportunities, and you have this person who is doing a whole bunch of stuff, which did you value more? Like, is there one more important, or is it really just case by case?
I'd probably talk to both of them and get a feel for their drive, how they work, or, um, take in information. I probably like the one that's done a lot of things. It depends, right? Have they done things and then dropped it because they're bored,
Yeah.
or so you're kind of digging into different things. But I like talking to people with some different perspectives and digging in. How do they think? How did they learn? Do they do something and then lose interest and move on to the next thing? Or did they do something, get the experience that they needed, and they're looking to build on or off of that? And there's something I probably look at people for internships maybe a little differently than if I was hiring someone on my team. So if I'm hiring someone on my team, someone that's doing things and dropping things and doing the next thing and dropping it might not be the person that I want to hire forever. It just depends. Do they have grit? Do they have initiative? Some of the soft skills that I look for beyond the can they learn and do this job? There are certain entry level jobs, at least for me as a hiring manager, that I'm like, I can teach someone how to recruit, but these are the core skills that someone needs. And if they've got those key skills, then I can teach them the craft and the art of being a recruiter. But other hiring managers aren't that evolved and are like, I need someone that has done this specific thing. And that hiring managers sometimes are so, if they've got an open position, then that means there's work on their team that's not getting done. And so they're stressed and they're
Yeah.
reacting from that stressful place instead of stepping back and saying, oh, I could teach this person and grow. And yes, it might be a little tight for the next 6 months while we get them up to speed, but the growth potential that they have to expand within that role far outweighs the couple months that it'll take to train and bring someone up to speed. I always tried to work with hiring managers and had trained my recruiters on how to kind of have those conversations to bring the hiring manager along the journey with entry level roles that we had open. Most of the time they realize the benefits outweigh the couple of months of stress. but sometimes you get people that aren't aligned with that philosophy and they really just want someone that does it. It's interesting at times when you have a hiring manager and there's like a new tech that they want and they want someone with 4 years experience, but then that tech's only been around for a year and a half. And you have, as a recruiter, to be able to kind of push back on them and say, okay, let's talk about this. So a lot of recruiters do have those skills and try and make that happen, but it doesn't always work out in the way that we want.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about just some general tips around the actual application process. So obviously, if it says apply here, you should probably apply there, do the requirements. But how about some general tips around cover letter, no cover letter, maybe certain things you should highlight in the resume, following up, should you not? Just some general best practices around those, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. We'll start with the resume. Applicant tracking systems parse the data in your resume into the applicant tracking system. Have a text-based resume. Don't have tables, columns, multicolors, any of that. That looks pretty. You could bring it in on the day of your interview with them, but the resumes can't parse that kind of stuff. So just have a very simple resume format so that the ATSs can read it. Cover letters, I'll be honest, like as a recruiter, I only looked at cover letters if there was like, I liked everything, but there was something I needed to look at. So it's good to have. It's not always required, but if you've got something that you want to explain in a little more detail, it's good for you to be able to tell your story instead of not having it anywhere for the recruiter to see. Sometimes when you've got two candidates that are really both strong or solid, the recruiter might go and look and see what other documentation they looked at, they uploaded, and that could be a determining factor. So I do think it's important, but I will be honest, like they probably won't look at it in case unless there's like a tiebreaker kind of situation. Some companies might say it's mandatory. If it is, then they're going to be looking at it a little more than others. But I think the recruiters are working through, especially in today's age, a lot of applicants. And so they are looking at your resume. AI and the bots are not auto rejecting you. If you get an auto rejection, it's likely that you didn't meet the basic qualifications of the job, not because, or there could be issues with your resume formatting, but it's likely there's a question that you answered and that's why you got an auto rejection. But AI might help sort people for the recruiter based on the requirements of the job and just tell like who might meet 100% versus 40%, but the robots aren't out to get you, and the robots are not making decisions on behalf of people. All the companies that I've worked for, the recruiters are still the ones reviewing the resume and making the decision on if someone's going to move forward or not. So that's something to think about. Work your network. We haven't talked about that yet. That's probably one of the most critical things is connecting with people on you can apply internships specifically. Some companies might get upwards of 300 to 1,000 people applying to an internship role. Some companies group it and they just have one internship job posting for many roles. Others might do one for one. I think using your network, not just connecting with someone on LinkedIn. So if you can figure out who the campus recruiters are at your target companies, and if you know people that work there, don't just connect with them, but engage with them on LinkedIn. So like things that they're saying, but also become a part of the conversation. So if you have a company you really want to work for, start to get to know the people, like some of the content that they're putting out, but then add your 2 cents as a student, thoughtfully to add to the conversation about the content that they're putting out there. That's one way that you'll start building relationships, and you've got to put stuff into it, not just connect with people. Let's see. And what am I forgetting? I'm trying to think of some good tips.
I think the only other thing was around like following up. So if I apply, should I message someone directly and be like, "Hey, just let you know I applied for this. I'm really excited. Like, what's the etiquette around that?
I think it's great. Like, and that ties into the connect with people on LinkedIn. If you can figure out who the hiring manager is or who the campus team is, you don't need to apply to like those campus recruiting teams at the organizations I've worked at have been pretty small, anywhere from like 2 to 5 people. And so if you apply to one internship and they like your background, maybe you're not the right fit for job A, but they might say, oh, you look like you'd be a great fit for this other hiring manager. Then they're going to call you about that other role. So if they've got 8 recs open for an internship, you don't need to apply to all 8 of them. They'll share resources with each other. But I think understanding who that university relations team is or campus recruiting, each company might call it different job titles, connect with them on LinkedIn. It is fine for you to follow up and ask them about their timelines. So some companies will start recruiting and be interviewing and making offers on a rolling basis, similar to school acceptances. Other companies might post the job, and in the job posting, it'll say, we're considering applications until this date, and then shut the rec down at that date. And then at that point, start going through everything. Most of the companies I've been at, they've been doing more of that rolling process. And so they are interviewing people and getting people through the process along the way. So apply if you see a job and you're interested in that company, go apply for it. Don't wait until the cutoff date because some of the jobs might not be there. You'll have the best opportunity being an early applier, but following up with them, asking them what the process is or when you should expect to hear, that's fine. Do it in a respectful way. But if you are commenting and engaging on the content that those people are putting out, your name is going to be fresh in their mind. So you don't have to follow up with them every week. If you have applied, if they responded, I'd say right now, a lot of those campus recruiters are crazy traveling for career fairs on campus. So if you don't hear from someone, give them a little grace from a follow-up perspective. But you can all, I think engaging with the company's social media and with some of the hiring managers or people in the departments is really helpful in building your brand with that employer.
Excellent. That's really good advice. Okay, so we apply, we stalk them, we get the invite. Hey, come on in for the interview. I say stalk lovingly.
Yes.
How about some general tips around interviewing and prepping for the interview?
Get to know the company a little bit, get to know the people, look at LinkedIn for the people that you're interviewing with. If you can't find someone's LinkedIn profile, that recruiter that's setting up the interview, you can ask them a question and see if they can tell you a little bit about the person if they don't have a LinkedIn profile. See if you can understand, and these are questions you can ask the recruiter. So the interviews, I'm assuming, might be a little beyond the recruiter screen, but see if you can understand some of the problems that that department or business is having. So I always like to think of it like a P1, a P2, and a P3 problem, right? Understand 3 problems or challenges. If you can't find out what the department challenges are, see if you can find out some of the company challenges or the industry challenges that are going on, so that when you're interviewing, you might be able to ask questions about those things and or frame some of your responses to the questions that they ask. Obviously, you want to use STAR or PAR, right? The situation, the task, the action, all of that, or problem, action, result. So those are things on how you frame it. They're going to ask behavioral based questions. And then think when they, at the end of the interview, say, what questions do you have for me? Don't ever say, oh, you answered all my questions. Like, just don't. Be prepared with some thoughtful questions, not tell me about the culture of the company or like kind of, lobs over with those types of questions, but like as something meaningful, like, in my research, I found these are the 2 challenges that you're facing. What are your thoughts on that? Like, are those the right challenges? Or What's a problem that you need someone to fix right now? So ask questions that kind of dig in a little deeper, show you're interested, or can help you evaluate the impact that you might be able to make, or the what you can get out of the internship or first job experience.
Is there a general question, almost like a canned question, that a lot of hiring managers for these positions tend to ask because they suck something out? Like you always hear of like, if you were a tree, what type of tree would you be? But is there a specific question like, hey, tell me about a time you did X, Y, Z? It's an evergreen question, but the way they answer really is indicative of either the person, personality, how they approach a problem. Is there any sort of those evergreen questions from a hiring manager that people should be aware of?
I don't, that changes so much and depends on the company and the industry. There's not necessarily one question that I can think of, but it really does depend on the type of job that you're going to be doing. If it's a sales job, it might be creative ways that you've identified leads, or thought, how did you think outside of the box? Or if you're in something that might be customer facing, they're going to ask you a question that might be on, how do you handle an irate customer, or your customer doesn't agree with what you're proposing, and how do you handle that? So they are going to be asking those types of behavioral questions that are aligned with the job. Something that you can do is, that's a great way to use AI, is to put the job description and information on the company into your prompt and ask AI to help you come up with the, most likely behavioral based interview questions that a manager might ask for, internship role or first job. And that may give you some ideas there. And then if you have the ability to practice answering them with a friend, to analyze that you've got kind of that problem, the action and result or impact, I think that can be really helpful. Your career center at your college can be helpful with mock interviews and things like that. So I think there's lots of ways that you can practice, and AI could help you come up with some of those top questions depending on the industry and job that you're applying to. I hate when
Perfect.
they
And
say, like, who's your favorite Marvel character and why, and some of that stuff. I've always trained hiring managers on asking questions that really relate to the job. For first jobs, more so than internships, you might sometimes be asked to do something, like they might give you a topic and say, build a PowerPoint, build a 5-minute presentation on this topic. Or I have, when I've hired people for my recruiting team, sometimes said, here's a job description. I want you to, in 48 hours, come back with an ideal candidate profile and a sourcing strategy. There's no right or wrong to it, but I'll use that in my interview with them to talk through kind of what their results look like, to understand their thought process and how they approached it. And to me, that's a great indicator of how someone might be successful in role.
perfect. That's great advice. All right, we're almost navigating through here, Julia. We're going to go through. I want to leave some for the book, obviously, so the details will be in the. I guess the devil's in the details. Details in the book. How about red flags? So we haven't talked about red flags at all. I have this kind of lumped in with my prep as like salary, right? Paid, unpaid. I think we're still 50-50 somewhere around there, but I don't know what makes sense. If coupling these or just separating them out, but maybe a couple red flags people should look for when they see a posting or in the interview, to be like, hey, I should probably run from this or be cautious. And then your view around salary. Are we finding that more internships nowadays are paid versus unpaid, or is it kind of still flip a coin and figure out where you're at? So I don't know, take whichever one you want first and weave them together
I'll
if you
start
can.
with salary, then we can talk about some red flags.
Okay.
So many internships, like from a corporate recruiting perspective, base salary is like the one area that we probably have the least wiggle room on. For internships, especially, there is usually a fixed rate that all interns get. Same rate for every intern. There's not really wiggle room usually on that. There could be some pay differences if you're in Memphis or if you're in San Francisco or New York City. But most of the time, or there could be a difference if you're an information technology intern versus an HR intern. So there is a little bit of wiggle room there, but in most cases, if you are applying for an internship, the rate is the rate, and they're not like, you're not on benefits or anything like that. It's just,
Right.
here's your hourly rate for this time period. Some companies, you are considered an employee of the company. Other companies might run it through a third party. From a payrolling perspective, you might be like a contractor, not a full-time employee, or not an employee. You're not really full-time because you're not benefitable. But there's some limitations there. For first job, and I'm actually working on a guide around compensation and salary. So this is great. It's not out there yet. I've been digging into it, but going through like all the different components of what's called total compensation. And a lot of people only focus on salary, and that leaves a lot of money on the table. So stay tuned for some of that. I do talk a little bit about negotiations in the book, though.
Perfect.
You can try and negotiate on salary for a first job, but if you don't have a lot of experience, like you don't have that impact or value story yet to tell to try and get salary, but you have other areas like a sign-on bonus, vacation, a stipend for learning and development, and other triggers. You should also understand the value of what benefits are worth and things like that, because the employers typically pay a portion of your benefits. And so those are all, there's a wide variety of components that go into compensation, and a lot of people don't understand that. From, I guess, any questions on that and before I go into red flags?
The only other thing is on for internships specifically, are there still a good prevalence of unpaid internships, or is that kind of dying off as the economy, not the economy, but like
I
it's
think
just more
there's
expensive
state
now than it was
laws and
15 years
things.
ago?
There's
Okay,
some state laws and things like that, but I think that like nonprofit and government may not pay. Every employer that I've worked at has paid internships.
gotcha.
So I think there's probably less unpaid, but I'm sure they're out there, especially smaller businesses
Yeah.
may do more unpaid from that perspective. Just balancing out that they don't have the same kinds of budgets that larger employers have.
Okay, so unpaid isn't necessarily a red flag.
No.
It's kind of the question I was getting at, which
Okay.
bad question
Yeah,
answer. So,
no, not at all.
all right,
It's, you're still getting valuable experience, whether paid or not. And it's not a question as a recruiter I'm going to ask you, was that internship paid or unpaid?
correct.
That doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is what skills and experience you're bringing to the table, what value and impact you can have to the company I'm working for.
Perfect.
From other red flags, I know I said it a little bit at the beginning, but there are a lot of scammers out there taking advantage of people who are looking for work, and just really be mindful. And I talk about it in the book, and I've done some videos and articles on it over the years. Most large employers will have something on their site, but there are a lot of scammers out there on LinkedIn and otherwise that'll reach out to you. If someone is looking to meet with you on Google Meets, or their email address is not from companyname.com, be wary. If an employer asks you that to pay money to them, not legit. If an employer is telling you that they're going to send you a $5,000 check so you can buy your laptop and pay for training, that's a scam. They're not going to be asking for your personal information. They're not going to be interviewing you on Google Meets. So just be mindful and be a smart, job seeker, consumer from that perspective. It's on the rise. So,
I just want to piggyback on the Google Meets for a minute. So we see a lot of just regular, ordinary jobs interview. A electronically before bringing in person. Sometimes it's just screening. Sometimes it's easier to do, right? Less time commitment. How do you figure out whether it's legit or not? Is it really just the email address that it's coming from? Hey, legit email, not legit email, and that's kind of your tell?
That's one of the tells. I think you look at someone's language and grammar, although some of the scammers are now using AI, and some of those easy tells aren't, you know, as easy to spot now. Um, just make sure I think the company URL is the internship on their company website.
Yeah.
Even they're even more sophisticated with some of the LinkedIn profiles and things like that. So just, have your heightened sense of awareness. If it's too good to be true, it's likely too good to be true. We're not paying $65 an hour for data entry. I mean, I'm getting texts every day, texts saying they're from Indeed or Ronstadt, which is a staffing agency. I get so many texts all the time. And, I don't always say the nicest things to them. And I've told some of them that their mother's ashamed of them for trying to scam people. But they're coming to
I
me,
get
I'm
the Indeed
sure.
ones all the time. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't stop. All right, Julia, we've dominated this time so far, so I appreciate the generosity you've had with yours. I think we've navigated through a lot here. Kind of wrapping up here, I want to get into just a couple things. You've mentioned some things already, but just try to bucket it. You're doing the internship. We've talked about how to pivot that into a full-time job and kind of the steps there, but we didn't actually talk about some of the things to do in the internship to help pivot that into a full-time job. So spend as much time or as little time as you want on here, but can you offer some tips, guidance, advice, whatever it might be for people doing the internships to help themselves put the best foot forward to then pivot that into a permanent job?
Yeah. That's a great question. Come in with a plan. I think don't be afraid to ask questions. So if your manager is asking you to do something and you're unsure, don't just do what you think needs to be done, because some managers are better at communication than others. So I'd say when you're asked to do something, maybe get confirmation, like what I hear you want me to do is A, B, C, D, and E, and you want it in this type of outcome. When do you need it by? Like ask those clarifying questions so that you have a real idea of what their expectations are so that you can provide the work output that they're expecting. Because the worst thing to do is to make an assumption, do a whole bunch of work, and then they're disappointed in what you've delivered upon. You can ask for check-ins like, okay, you want me to do this, and then you could check back in with them at some point along the way as well, just to show them, hey, here's my first draft. Want to make sure this is meeting your expectations. Um, I have a whole chapter in there in the book around your one-on-ones. So make sure that you've got
Good.
regular one-on-ones with your boss. And then that is your time. Don't let them lead it. I mean, they might lead it a little bit, but come prepared to your one-on-ones with questions that you might have, information that you want to share with them, progress on what you're doing. Or if you aren't being kept busy to 100% of your capacity, that's a great way to start the dialogue to see if there's more that you can do to help them. Make yourself invaluable to them during your internship time. Ask them, you're there not just to do work and to learn from them, but also to help build your network. So they might be able to introduce you to other people at the organization where you could have virtual coffees and meet with people and get to know what they're doing and things like that. So those are a couple of things that you can do to kind of master the time that you're there, working on projects that are impactful, making sure that you're on track. No question is a dumb question. So make sure that you ask the questions and get the information that you need to be successful.
That's really good advice. I always found if you have the opportunity as well, based on the office environment and what you're actually doing, is spend a little bit of time sitting in the kitchen or wherever they congregate, right by the coffee maker, and just work from there if you can. Because even a little bit of time, people will come in, they'll introduce themselves. Hey, I'm blah, blah, blah. And you get to know people that way as well. I've always found that to be really helpful, especially if you're new. Right?
And
So,
I'd say be
uh,
present. I think that's a really good one. Be present and be visible. Even if you have the opportunity to work remotely or work from home, when you're at home, you're not sitting in the lunchroom or at the water fountain or in the break room talking to people and building those relationships. If you can be on site, you are going to build deeper relationships, meet more people, get more info on kind of what the culture is really like and the insight on some of the work that you're doing. You can have those hallway conversations and ask a question and might get a deeper answer. I think those are all ways, if you have that visibility, then when it comes time to making an offer, people are going to know and remember you.
yep, makes tons of sense. All right. So, Julia, I know we spent a lot of time digging through some of this. Anything I neglected to ask you that you feel is important to the audience to know?
Um, I should have had like two things ready, right? I tell people to be prepared with questions for interviews, and I'm like, we really did cover the whole gamut. Um, Obviously, if you've got more questions, follow me on social, reach out to me. I've got this is the author copy, so there's a little band not for sale, but I've got the book here. I really did try in the book to cover everything from that very beginning of figuring out your resume to how to be successful. Maybe the one thing is you've been gone through your internship summer. It's really important to stay connected to those people if you want it, if you want references, or if you still after the end of the summer say, this is a company I still want to work for. I think it's important to stay in touch with those people. And networking, you really need to invest time and energy in it. It's not just a one connection and it's done. So take the time during the school year to stay connected with your manager or coworkers, keep them updated on some of the project or the work that you've been doing, so that they can see what's going on, and then that keeps you top of mind when an opportunity comes up. We have in other organizations had interns that worked over winter break. So if during any of your breaks you're available to work, they might take you up on that. Not all companies do that, but I've been at many that have or have kept some students on through fall or spring semester as like a part-time job. So there are opportunities like that to keep that connection. But sometimes you work somewhere and you do a good job, but you're like, nope, there's no way in hell I want to work for this company. And that's okay, right? Don't burn your bridges, but you want to stay connected with some of those people because people do move and go to other organizations and there might be an opportunity somewhere else.
Yeah.
But the internship, they're interviewing and this is their time, the 10-week interview of your experience, but you're interviewing them as well. And so if it's not a fit, don't accept a job with them after if you're offered one.
That's a really good, two actually really good points there. One, the reason for staying in contact is people do switch companies, right? New roles, new opportunities, and it's a really good network to have. But two, that fit's got to go both ways. I really love the fact that you said that. I think it was a great addition to it. When you were talking there, it got me to think, and we've had a lot of guests on, and I am one of these people in my life where you do something that is not what you studied in school, right? There's something there, or you've made a career pivot at some point. And multiple people have said, hey, when I did the first of two internships, they were studying something else and they got into the job and they're like, I hate this. I don't want to do this with my life, right? And they pivoted. So sometimes learning what you don't want to do, just as much as learning the company
Yep.
you don't want to work with, is just as important. So you mentioned, Julia, reach out to you. So my next question was, if someone does want to reach out, ask a question, what's the best way for someone to get a hold of you? And feel free to plug we'll have it in the show notes as well, but plug the website if you have a website for your book as well.
Yep, it's hired.com. So hi2hired.com is my website, Julia at hi2hired.com. And I'm debating if I created a TikTok for High to Hired. I don't know if I'm going to become a TikToker or not. I'm still debating, but I'm on Reddit sometimes, commenting on things there, but just, and LinkedIn, Julia Levy on LinkedIn. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty active on all the socials, so you can get me if you've got questions. And love this conversation and want to make sure, especially with unemployment for this, Gen Z coming into the workforce is higher than the national averages. So whatever I can do to impart my insider knowledge and help job seekers is, really important to me.
Perfect and well said. So Julia Levy, everyone, HR Pro, author of From High to Hired, Your Inside Guide to Internships. Go check it out. Pick up the book and be happier for it. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to explore other careers or share yours with us, please check out our website. Until next time, go Bills.